Before we start the show today, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this week's episode. It's Okun Arts, an eclectic shop in Seattle, Washington, filled with vintage Japanese yukata cottons. The love child of artisan quilter Patricia Belia, Okun Arts is a magical place to visit when you're in the Seattle area, or you can check it out from your desktop at okunarts.com. That's OKAN arts.com. Thanks so much, Okun Arts. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 59 of the Walshy Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today, we're talking about dyeing and patterning fabrics with my guest, Malka Dubrawsky. Malka Dubrawsky got her degree in studio art from the University of Texas in Austin. She trained to be a printmaker, but while home with children and without a press on hand, she began to work in fiber art. After several years exploring art quilts, Malka became interested in connecting with people more directly by creating functional items out of her own hand-dyed and patterned fabrics. Today, she designs and sews quilts and pillows and creates hand-dyed yardage, all of which she sells in her online shop, A Stitch and Dye. Malka is the author of 2 craft books. She's an instructor on Craftsy. She designs fabrics for Moda and will soon be opening a makerspace in Austin, Texas, where she lives. Malka Dubrawsky, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
Great. I'm so glad to talk to you today. I'm really excited to hear more about you and your story. So if you met me at a party and I didn't know anything about you, didn't know anything about what you do for work, how would you describe what you do?
Oh, people ask me a lot of times, so what do you do? What do you do? It's like it's the typical party question. I usually just, depending on the person, I usually just say I design fabric for a major fabric company, or, I try to kind of limit it a little bit because, it's just kind of an icebreaker of sorts. But I think of myself as an artist designer, and, I will tell them that I hand dye and pattern fabric. That's usually the first thing I tell people because it's probably the thing that speaks to me the most, and then I design and sew quilts and other items, oftentimes using those fabrics. So
okay,
that's if I was going to give you the longer version.
The longer version. And do people immediately are like, oh, tie-dye? Like, is that what do they go there?
Not always. Some people, depending on their familiarity, say somebody's got some familiarity with batiks, they will then talk to me about that. No, unless I go into, because I have done a fair amount of shibori, though never any tie-dyeing. Unless I go into that and say I've done shibori and explain how it relates to tie-dyeing, usually I feel like they probably assume I dye kind of solids more than anything, especially if it's somebody who's already in the fiber world or fabric world, and so they imagine hand-dyed solids.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. It's always interesting to see like what visuals like it conjures up in people's minds, like where they go. Because if you say you sew, most people immediately go to clothes. Like, oh, you make clothes. So sewing is big. There's a lot to it, and it's sometimes difficult to explain. So for a long time you were an art quilter, and now I would describe your quilts as modern quilts. And right. So I know you sort of made that shift, and I think that it's not totally unusual, but it's somewhat of an unusual shift from art quilting to modern quilting. So I wondered if you could describe what you feel like the difference is between those two sort of genres of quilting.
I think probably in my mind, the number one thing is functionality. I think even if a modern quilt is going to go on a wall, you could also see it functioning on a bed. Maybe this version is small, and so it can only fit on a wall, or, the bed's too small, too big for this particular scale, but it definitely has functionality. And art quilts, though some of them could be functional, by and large, they're not. They don't feel functional. They feel like they're kind of playing with those materials. And that's, I guess, the other things. When I was in making art quilts, I remember that there were other quilt artists who were, embedding things in their quilts and using like thick dye paints or dye paints on the surface and with beads and all sorts of stuff. There's I forget, Jane Birch Cochran. I was going to say I forget her name, but I don't. And she would like embroider, just her pieces were more like assemblages on fabric than anything else. And so, it could never function on a bed. You couldn't wash it. You couldn't let the dog get on it. I do feel that modern quilts, if I had to describe just one thing about them, it's that they have functionality. I do also think that they're very much, what separates them from traditional quilts is that aesthetic, that kind of simple, spare, almost, Scandinavian aesthetic, though not necessarily always Scandinavian. Maybe that speaks more to the modern quilts that appeal to me. But yeah, I do think it has to do with functionality.
Okay. And so you made that shift because you were seeking that functionality. Like you had a lot of success as an art quilter, right? You'd shown in galleries and maybe won some awards and could have kind of stuck with that route. So was there some push inside of you that made you feel like, I want to do something that people can actually use? Was there a feeling like, this isn't quite the right fit for my, my artistic, drive,
Oh, definitely. There was one year when I was both in Quilt National and Visions in the same year, which is, was huge. And because these are Quilt National is the pinnacle of art quilt shows, but Visions was, right behind it. And, but I just felt like, in all honesty, I know it seems like I guess to some degree I wanted the kind of, not justification. I wanted the feeling that comes with selling your work, really selling your work, feeling that, that it's sort of like a validation, which I got it. You shouldn't want. It should be all about, making this stuff. But I wanted to feel like people really wanted it in their homes, not just to come look at it at a gallery and say, isn't that great, So I wanted that. I also wanted to feel like it connected with other people, like people were using it, I had made quilts for my own kids. By this point, I had two at least. I have three girls total, but I had two at least. And I had made them quilts for their beds when they were young and or when they were infants. And I just really wanted to have that for other people. I didn't want it to be so far removed. One of the things that I loved about making art quilts that was different from making, say, prints or paintings or drawings was that you could come up to a quilt was like something you could touch, But more and more, I felt like the art quilts that I was making and that I was that the shows that I was a part of, you were really weren't supposed to touch them. You were supposed to see them from a distance. They were art, and they were over here, and here you are, person over there. And I really wanted to bridge that gap. I wanted the person in the quilt to kind of live in the same space, to exist, to exist in the same space, whether in a home or on a table or whatever. And I wanted that stuff to be used. I wanted it to be used and used up, I didn't want it to be something so precious.
I like that idea of used up because I think that, one of the things we struggle with is the definition of art and the definition of craft and sort of where that line falls. And one of the ways to think about craft is that it's used. And I think that's a pretty common way to think about it. But another way to think about it, sort of an extension of that, is that it can be used up. I like that. I think that's a good sort of addendum onto that definiation.
Yeah, it's really kind of a Buddhist mentality. Those monks, the Tibetan monks that make the mandalas,
right,
out of sand, and then they blow it all away. That kind of non-attachment thing. I think it's a pretty good life lesson, let alone crafting lesson.
Yeah, so. For years I made greeting cards, and one of the reasons I used to love to do that, it was just this ephemeral piece of art that you would get. It served a purpose. You would write a message inside. People might hang on to it for, a few weeks or something like that, and then they would throw it away. And there was something about that I really liked. Not that you would throw away a quilt, but you know what I mean? You use it, maybe it gets threadbare over many washings or gets stained or whatever, and it becomes part of your life instead of just art, which, I love art as well. So they just serve different purposes.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the fabrics that you use to dye, because I think that from watching your Craftsy class is kind of an important thing. So you use a certain kind of Pima cotton that is labeled PFD, prepared for dyeing, called Pimatex. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that fabric and what makes it different from sort of, if you bought Kona cotton, for example, or something like that?
Yeah, and I would say that I love Kona cotton, but I would never use just with Kona cotton.
Okay.
And so the thing about this Pimatex, it has a really high thread count. And what I have found, and this is, strictly, I'm not a scientist, I'm no chemist here, so I haven't figured it out, chemically speaking, but my experience has been that when I use this Pima cotton, because it's got a really high thread count, number one, it absorbs those colors. I mean, it's almost like sateen. It just drinks them up, and I do all my dyes. I don't do any direct dye painting, which means I don't prepare my fabric ahead of time with the fix and then apply the dyes directly. I always, I might pre-color a piece of fabric. I might dye it a base color, say yellow or blue, and then dye on top of that. But I'll put patterning with wax resist in between those two dyes, and it's all done in vat dyes. So it's all long soaks in dye baths. So number one, it absorbs the colors just incredibly well. I mean, and it reflects it back. Since it has this really high thread count, it reflects it back in a way it's got an intensity and a sheen to it that I really like. And then the main thing is, so the way I get the wax out is I boil it out. I have these big stock pots, and I put them on the stove with some water, and I literally boil that fabric up to the surface and then kind of process it in tepid water a little bit, and then it's done. I would love to do this very same process on commercial fabric, but every time I've ever tried to use commercial fabric, I can't get the wax out. Same thing with muslin. Can't get the wax out. There's just nothing. I mean, I want it to go back to being fabric. And in order to go back to being fabric, it has to have the wax removed. So that's why I use the Pimatex.
Okay. And is there a place where people can buy some of that if they want to kind of give this a try at home? Where would you recommend that they source some Pimatex?
Oh, no, I would buy it from Dharma. You can buy it by the yard from Dharma. They'll even send you little fabric sample squares. I don't know, they're 3x3 or whatever. I mean, I feel like if you get by the bulk price, if you're interested in doing lots and lots, it's actually relatively reasonable. I mean, I think you can source it even cheaper than that if you really, say, want to go into business or whatever. But I think Dharma's actually got a pretty reasonable price, and they'll sell it to you by the yard. And if you get to 10 yards, they give you a discount. So Dharma Trading, I think, is a great source for that.
Okay. And do you buy your dyes there as well?
Yes, I do buy my dyes from Dharma Trading.
Okay. And is there a particular, I mean, I haven't looked to see what their range of dyes are, but is there a particular brand that you recommend, or, for people who just sort of want to give this a try at home, get the right supplies?
Right. Well, so first off, Dharma has little kits, and they're not like lame kits where, they'll sell you, say, a kit of primary colors, and they come in these tiny little containers, and they're enough to dye, X number of yards, not a whole lot, but some. So that's a good place to start. They're always, I use the Procyon MX dyes, and it's not so much that it's a brand, because there is no brand. It's a type of dye, and these are cold water dyes. So when I mix them up, I can mix them up in cold water. I prefer to actually mix them up in hot water because they dissolve better, but I will mix them up in a separate container. The reason I have to use cold water is I've put wax on this fabric, wax that I melted. If I put that waxed fabric into hot water, well, then I've defeated the purpose of waxing it, because now the wax is going to start melting in my dye bath. But I can, in a separate, say, 1 cup container, mix my dyes, have them dissolve really nicely, and then I've only added a little bit of warmth to my general dye bath. Mm-hmm. I haven't really affected the temperature. But they will sell you little kits of those, say primary colors, or, they'll break them up into the newest spring colors or whatever, and you can try them out and see if you like them. They're incredibly easy to use. I mean, we're talking about a recipe that requires, basically the dyes, salt, soda ash, which I don't buy my soda ash from Dharma. I love the place, but you know what? Everybody's got a pool supplies store near their place, hopefully. I mean, and God forbid you should live too far from a pool supply store.
I know. Well, here in Boston, it's a little less frequent than maybe in Austin, but
Right. Well, so I have one. I could have one almost within walking distance, and I've been going there for years. And they don't have any idea what I'm doing with all the soda ash, but they think that I have a really well maintained pool. So and I want to keep that impression up.
Right.
So it's basically salt and water, soda ash, and the dye. You may or may not need a water softener depending on the hardness of the water in your area, but it's a super simple recipe.
Right. And you work, I mean, we'll talk a little bit later about your studio, but for many years you've had sort of two studios. You have like a sewing studio in a bedroom or a room in your house, and then you do all this dye work in your garage. So this is something that you can do at home. It's fairly simple, certainly simpler than printmaking, which was what you studied in college.
Right, and I did lithographs, and for those folks who know what that means, I mean, I worked on these huge stones that they would quarry in Bavaria, and you had to have a big sink to remove the previous image, and we even had to have, it was called Big Joe. It was like a forklift kind of thingy that you could move around yourself. It was almost like you could push it around because these stones were too heavy to just carry in your hands. So you needed, like a little bed that you would slide the stone onto and then roll it over to the table or wherever you were working and then slide the stone back onto your work surface. So it was not something that I could do at home. But yes, I have been doing it. In fact, I just moved to my new space, which, kind of partly my space, but also this maker space, this past week. And, I have been using my garage for all this stuff for years, for, 20 years plus.
Right. So I love that because I think that it's a way for people who may be home with children, or, may just not have access to an outside studio or a college or something like that, you can really do a lot with pretty simple materials at home, cold water. You don't need something super special to be able to make beautiful patterned and dyed fabrics. So,
and I talked about it, I certainly talked about it in my craftsy class, but I talked about it in my first book, Color Your Cloth. And at that point, my joke was that I was working in my house of the time had a 3-car garage. And so I could actually even, park my car, not too far from where I was dyeing fabric. And that was ever so convenient because I would lay out, fabric on my car. But yeah, and before that, I didn't even have a garage. I just had like a covered porch, which I know wouldn't work places that are colder. But in Austin, I could pretty much work any day of the year, outside essentially on my covered porch. So.
Right. Okay. I want to talk about batik because, we all hear this word batiks a lot when we are, in the quilting industry. People talk a lot about making things out of batiks. And I know that you've said before that the batiks that we refer to that are in our local quilt shop, in your view, are sort of not actually batiks. That's in some way like a misnomer. So I just wanted to see if you wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I do want to clarify that. I don't think of those. First of all, to me, a batik is something that has wax resistant, and sometimes, or has been patterned with wax resist, and sometimes these fabrics will have a little bit of resist of some sort in them, but they don't. They don't. I mean, if you think about traditional batiks, and not that I make fabric that looks like traditional batiks, but if you think about those fabrics also don't look like traditional batiks, which often are very representative in their nature. It's very figurative. It's definitely identifiable as an image. The other thing is, I know that some people really love that kind of modelly quality that a lot of these batiks have. I don't know that a lot of modern quilters really care for them. In fact, if I had to just guess, I would say no. But I don't think that modelly quality is a function of, like, if I took a piece of waxed fabric and wadded it up to get that mottled stuff, I'd be breaking my wax too, and I would get a lot more kind of wax infiltration or dye infiltration to places I didn't want it, then there'd be less reason to put that patterning down. Why would I go to all the trouble of putting that patterning down and then scrunch up my fabric so that all of a sudden I'd have, all these hairline bits of dye going everywhere.
Yeah, your fabric to me is very graphic. It's very crisp and graphic in the way that sort of modern design is.
Yeah, no, that's what I want. And it's very simple to achieve. When I put my fabric into dye baths, I don't scrunch it up. I put it as flat as possible into that dye bath to preserve the pattern that I've put on with wax.
Right.
So, I mean, though I'm happy for folks to buy any kind of fabric that they like. I feel like it's a disservice. I feel like maybe it's my job in life to change people's opinions of what they think. I wish they wouldn't call those batiks. I wish they would call them modeled solids or something else, because they're not batiks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about that because I think it's an important thing. So in addition to dyeing and patterning your own fabrics, and we talked about your sort of frustration with some of the commercial fabrics as far as getting the wax out, but you do other things with commercial fabrics that are really cool. So you over dye and then you also discharge them, and I wanted to see if you wanted to talk about those two processes and how they work, because that's another neat thing for people to experiment with.
Yeah, so actually I wrote an article for Quilting Arts. I think it was like back in 2009, maybe 2009, 2010, so that issue. And it was about this shibori process that I use. It's a very old process. It's called itajime, and it's clamp shape resist. I also did a little DVD workshop kind of video for Interweave Press a few years ago. And it basically, the traditional form is, you take some fabric and you fold it, and then you take two pieces of wood that are the same shape. Maybe they're two triangles of wood or two squares of wood. And then you bind those together with twine, and wherever you have that compression of the wood touching the fabric, you get a resist. And so when you dip that into dye, you don't have dye going in those places, and you'll have this impression of squares or triangles or whatever. I do essentially the same thing, except I do it with pieces of plexiglass and with the C-clamps that you buy at the hardware store. And so, I have a lot more choices in my shapes. I used to have this plastics fabricator make my shapes. I'd go in there and they have scraps from whatever they're doing, and then I would ask them to make shapes. There's also Rossi Hutchinson, who's big in the modern quilt movement. Mm-hmm. She has an online Etsy store where she has some shapes too, and she's she has a connection to someone who has. It's basically owning a skill saw with a plexiglass blade. But anyway,
yeah.
And so, that's a great way to get some shapes as well. You could even buy, if you really wanted to just start like today, I would go to the fabric store and buy some templates, buy 2 sets of templates, 2 triangles or whatever, as long as there's the same shape, about a 1/4 of an inch thick in terms of the template. Even 1/8 of an inch will work for you for a while till it breaks, and some C-clamps, and you're set. You're ready to start, and dye. And what I do is the thing that I do is, rather than do it onto undyed or just, single dyed fabric, I do it on commercial fabric. And that's where I love to use commercial fabric. So I did a whole series of quilts. I called them the Twinkle quilts, and they're just 4 by 4 inch squares, but each one has got either a dyed or discharged, meaning bleached out circle in the center. And I've made these quilts as little just kind of wall pieces. I've made them as king size quilts for customers. And the same thing with squares. I'll do nesting squares. Obviously, that requires multiple times in the dye bath, but the principle is that it all looks like it's pieced, but it's not, or it looks like it's appliqued, but it's not, and it's all done on this commercial fabric. So you really have this kind of mosaic of patterning that happens. The cool thing about using commercial fabric is if you take color out, oftentimes you can still see the patterning that you took out. It's like you've got this shadow. Or if you add color, especially a pale color, you can still see again the patterning that was underneath. And so it gives you so much, it gives you a certain richness that you couldn't get just by using kind of just blank fabric.
Yeah, and you look at it and you're like, wow. First of all, it totally looks like applique, especially the circles. You would definitely think they were appliqued until you got up close and could see that there wasn't a seam there, first of all. And also, like, you just look at it and it's like marvel about, like, how does, it's almost like it faded out here, and then inside it's rich. Like, how did this happen? So it's really, I don't know, it's just a visual feast. Like, it's a wonderful thing to look at. I love it.
I feel like it goes back to when I used to make prints. When I used to make lithographs, we were taught this technique that I think that they taught us just because, they felt like, oh, you should know all the techniques. And, you want to have a full bag of equipment or techniques to work with. But I ended up using that. It was called a reversal. And basically, so you have this stone, and on this stone, the whole principle behind lithography is that you draw in this kind of oil-filled crayon or paint or whatever, and then the way you process it, the stone has like two different sections. Some sections that are kind of, they accept oil, and some sections that reject oil, and that's how you keep the stone from, having white space. That's how you keep the white spaces and the drawn spaces. And, well, there was this technique where you could basically, process the stone, and you would reverse all that. You would reverse all the places that had been, places that were drawn became blank, and all the places that were blank became drawn places. And then they also talked to us about how you could use contact paper to shield, to kind of use as a resist, essentially. So some places would reverse and some places wouldn't. And then I did that a lot, and I realized, oh my goodness, when you reverse a stone and then you reverse it again, well, the thing about the stone is it's actually this almost living thing. When you want to create a new image on a stone, you take it to a sink and you basically use grit to take off the top layer so that you've got a fresh stone and you can put your drawing on there. But the information from the previous drawings is like inside the stone. And so what I found when I did these reversals is that all this stuff, all this information from other people's drawings that I had nothing to do with, came up. And I could bring those up. I could intentionally bring them up with some like an oil crayon, and they would become this part of my image, and I had nothing to do with it. And I feel like this is the same thing. When I use commercial fabric, I get, all the stuff that was somebody else's creation, but now I can manipulate it and make it my own, and it adds a richness to the little 4-inch square that wouldn't be there if I just did them straight on as, standard itajime shibori.
Wow, that is an amazing analogy. So interesting. And I also really enjoy the idea of looking at commercial fabric as somebody else's artwork that you're then manipulating, because really that is what it is. That's what you're purchasing when you purchase a yard of prints, from somebody, from a company or whatever. Somebody designed that print, and you're taking their image and then you're using that in your own creation, whether you're going to dye it or just sew it, either way. But that is the way to think about it. I want to take a moment right now to talk about our sponsor, Okan Arts, a fabric shop based in Seattle that specializes in vintage Japanese yukata cottons. The owner of Okan Arts, Patricia Bellia, says she likely has the largest inventory of yukata cottons outside of Japan, with over 600 bolts. I wasn't sure what yukata cottons were, frankly, when Patricia got in touch with me, and she sent me some to play with. So here's what they are. They are used for making unlined casual kimonos in Japan. So one bolt of yukata cotton makes one yukata, it's kind of like a little kit. And they're a narrow width fabric. They're about 14 inches wide, and they're designed to make a classic kimono with wing sleeves and a shawl collar. The hand-dyed yukata cottons are made in a multi-step process with a paper stencil and luscious dyes in small workshops. And each year there are less and less of these artisan workshops that are still making hand-dyed fabrics this way. And the cottons are usually just printed today. So these are really rare, and they're so beautiful. So Patricia sources her cottons from over 30 vendors in Japan, basically buying dead stock from warehouses and antique shops and flea markets. And some of her fabrics are really quite old. They're all between 20 and 60 years old. So they're all vintage. It's really kind of amazing. The fabrics are then sent to Tokyo for consolidation and then air-shipped to her in Seattle. And one package usually holds about 25 bolts, and each one is different. So it's really an exciting day for her when the shipment arrives and she unpacks them. And Patricia tells me that Yukata cottons are perfect for sewists who just love fabric, love the richness of hand-dyed colors, and they're great for modern quilters who are interested in really bold patterns. So check them out at okanarts.com. That's OKAN Arts, ARTS.com. And now back to my chat with Malka. So you're in the process of moving your studio, so let's talk a little bit about that. What are you most excited about moving out of your house? Sort of how did you know that it was really time? I mean, was there like a particular instance when you're like, you know what, if I could just move, I would be able to have, more of something or more space, more work, more production, more people working with me, or what?
So a lot of it is that I can go into bigger production, and I did recently hire an assistant. It wasn't entirely motivated by this. I mean, I'm happy to say that I've recovered from it, but I broke my ankle 9 weeks ago, and I was on crutches, and I literally could do no work. I could not make a dye bath. I mean, I couldn't even carry a coffee cup from one room to the other, so I wasn't making any dye baths. So I hired an assistant to basically do all that stuff for me, and I'm not letting her go because it's great. It's all of a sudden I'm like two people. I can do twice as much work. And
who was she? How did you find her? Was she a student at the college, or was she somebody that was also already a dyer? Or was there a lot of training? Because it's pretty specialized what you do.
So I actually found her. So I have a friend here who owns a store, the Cloth Pocket, and I'm happy to give a plug to the Cloth Pocket. My friend Nicole set me up on this Facebook group called Chatty, CHATTI. It's, invite only, but it's basically, I mean, anybody who wants to be on it can be asked to be invited. It's for folks in the fiber textile industry. I don't know if it's only in Central Texas. It must be, because most of the people seem to be talking about things, that are happening in my area. And I posted it on Chatty and said, I'm looking for a studio assistant. And, I actually got quite a few responses from that. And then this gal, we had some kind of common people that we knew at other kind of fabric stores. And, she's a quilter, and she has a lot of actual retail experience, but mostly I felt like I could teach anybody who was enthusiastic what they needed to know. And she's certainly proven to be all that. She's proven to be very enthusiastic. And, when sometimes I have her sewing stuff, and she's just like, I just never thought that I would get to a point in my life where I was sewing as part of my job. And she's so happy about it. So, who doesn't love working with somebody like that?
So how many hours do you have her on now?
So I have her, say, 2 or 3 hours a day, and the rest of the day I work on my own. And that's only because I've just started to expand my business, and it's just my nature not to, I'd rather work too many hours myself. I'm a little more, I wish I was more, well, I don't actually in any way wish I was more Donald Trump-like, but if I was more risky or more risk-taking financially, I really do work within the parameters of the budget that I've got. And it's been, it's been difficult kind of, emotionally for me to even invest in a studio space. So I'm not ready to invest in a full-time assistant. Yeah.
Okay. So she'll come with you. I mean, she's come now, you've moved. So she's come with you to your outside studio space, and you're going to be able to do more both with the space and with her there. And then you're splitting the space with another maker. And then you have this third space that's going to be sort of for groups to come in and use as almost like a classroom space.
Yeah, it's great. So it's an industrial space, and and my friend who I'm splitting with is like Mr. Super Handy. So he built us walls, and he put in lighting and plumbing, and And so we do have this, the whole space is 1,400 square feet. So we divided it up into two kind of separate spaces for ourselves, and then the big maker space in the middle. And yes, we have tables, and we have a sink, and we'll have a washing machine in there, because we're really anticipating the most of the workshops will be fiber or dye oriented, though they don't have to be. They could be basically anybody who, let's say you have a project that you're working on and you just don't have the space in your own home to work on it, then you could rent our space. Or if you want to teach a workshop, but you don't have any place to teach that workshop, you're a painter or you're a weaver, and you want workshop space, again, you can rent our space. And so we provide, and we will even have an opportunity for folks who say want to dye some fabric and they don't want to invest in all the dyes. Well, you can rent the materials, or essentially buy the materials from us and use all our equipment and dye fabric that way.
And is your partner, is he your business partner in this venture? Is he a dyer as well, or does he do something different?
No. So this is my friend Jeff is he's a jack of all trades. So he, for many years, was an engineering consultant, but he's incredibly handy, so much so that he himself built these two loft spaces behind his house, or his wife is one of my closest friends, and they rent them out, but it's not like he went and found a contractor. Literally, he built them. And so he, for many years, has been buying bikes from like Craigslist and then fixing them up and reselling them. And he wants to start a program where he could even hire, say, a couple people and train them and give them jobs to do the very same thing. And so our space is a nonprofit. We're not looking to set the world on fire financially with this space, but so that's what his space is about. He has he basically fixes these bikes and then resells them. But he can, I don't know that there's a thing that needed to be done that Jeff couldn't do. So
this sounds like a really exciting new venture. So congratulations on the move. And the workshop space sounds like a fantastic resource and something that we could definitely use here in Boston as well. So that's super cool. And I want to talk a little bit about your shop. So you have a shop called A Stitch and Dye, which is also the name of your blog. And that's where you sell yardage, and people can buy, your hand-dyed fabric, your patterned fabric. You also sell finished goods that you make, like pillows and quilts, and you have some patterns. And your shop is on Etsy, and I just wanted to ask, why Etsy? And you certainly have, I think, for sure, a strong enough following to have your own spot, your own online shop. Is that something you've considered, or sort of what is the thinking behind e-commerce?
Well, I think that, I think that e-commerce is just so, if nothing else, so darn convenient, so it doesn't really hurt you to do it. Even if you're, and I don't see myself ever wholesaling the fabric itself, because it's just so labor intensive that I don't think that I could, except I do QuiltCon. I did QuiltCon last time when it was here, and I'm going to be doing it in Pasadena. And when I can, when I've got, customers that are right there in my space, the fabric sells really, really well. But then I'm not having to wholesale it. In many ways, I almost wholesale it to my customers. It's just so expensive to make that I can't see wholesaling it to a store and then them marking it up, for twice that amount.
Right. So you feel like in order for this to be financially feasible, you need to get the 97% or whatever of the of the cost, of the price, the retail price. You can't get 50% of it because it just isn't going to be worth it. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I set up I set it up years ago, 2007, 2008, and at the time, I don't know that there were a lot of choices. I mean, I could be mistaken, but my impression was there weren't a lot of choices. Etsy was a lot smaller. And it was great for me. I mean, it was terrific. I feel like now, and I actually am working on my current space is a WordPress space, and I had a great graphic designer design it for me. It's not as user friendly. I'm not, a graphic designer myself. It's not as user friendly as I'd like it to be. So I'm actually migrating my space somewhere else where I can do e-commerce directly on my space and have a little more flexibility in terms of changing things. And I will be opening up a true kind of everything that you could find in my Etsy store kind of space in this new space. And I don't know that Etsy's gotten really, really big and really, really big, and things have definitely changed on there. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Do you feel like when you open your own online shop, you might close the Etsy shop or keep both? Not sure yet.
There's no incentive for me to close it. Mm-hmm. It's not like it's, super expensive for me to maintain. But I do see myself potentially putting less effort into it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that I do it is I, like you, I've had my Etsy shop for a long time. I also have e-commerce on my own site. And what I do is I just promote my own site. So if I send a newsletter and that sort of thing, or link to a pattern or something that I'm selling, a supplies, an ebook, et cetera, I just promote my own site because I feel like Etsy promotes the Etsy shop. I don't need to do anything there. So,
right.
That's Etsy's job. So I just ignore it and it just kind of functions on its own with no effort to whatever degree it's going to function. And I just kind of let it be.
Yeah.
That's my attitude. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Moda. Because I think it's something that people are curious about. And I just wondered, I wonder a bunch of things about it. But first, how did the relationship with Moda come about? Was that something that you always dreamed of? You said you can't wholesale the fabric yourself. It's just too expensive. So this gives you a way to widely distribute it. I mean, it's in my local quilt shop over, right down the road from me. So, was that like the impetus for Moda, or did it come about in a different way?
It came about in a very almost organic way. I had just published, not Color Your Cloth, Fresh Quilting with Interweave Press. And maybe a few months later, Cheryl Freyberg, who's a design director at Moda, called me on the phone and asked me, if I would be interested in designing fabric. She'd seen my book and she really loved the patterns, and she noticed that I tried to limit it, but I did include some of my hand dyes in the designs for the book. And would I be interested in designing fabric? And they're in Dallas, which is like 3.5 hours from here. I felt a little guilty taking a flight there because, it's like a 40-minute flight, but I did it. And so I went to meet with them, and I brought stuff that I had designed for my own store. So just the kind of fabrics that I was making for my own store, and spent the day there, kind of putting it together in a collection. Part of putting together a collection is developing a palette and requesting strike-offs, or basically sample pieces in color combinations that are within your palette, but you might not have already created. Then, a few months later, the strike-offs came, and I was just beyond thrilled. I remember turning to my youngest daughter and saying, I just may never dye fabric again. That they really wanted to recreate that hand-dyed look. They really, but not in they do have batiks, or what they call batiks, but that not in that way. They really wanted it. They really wanted to recreate what I was creating, but just in a commercial process. And I was very, very happy with the strike-offs. And then you have to cull it down. You ask for, I don't even know how many pieces of fabric, and then you have to cull it down to, say, 40, something that's reasonable to create as a collection. And I'll tell you what, I will never forget the day that I get sample yardage, say 5 yards of every print and solid. I'll never forget the day those boxes came to my house, and I opened them up and I laid them out on my dining room table. And first of all, the biggest thing is to see your name on the selvage of fabric, which is an even greater thrill than seeing your name on the spine of a book. I don't know why, but it was just like, it was beyond thrilling, and then to get to work with that fabric, and then I even took my own commercial fabric and over-dyed it and charged it,
That's
so.
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you prepare a collection for Moda, and how long have you been working with them? That was several years back.
Yeah, that was, I want to say it's been about 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many collections a year, sort of on
I
average?
usually only do one collection a year. I'd like to do more, but I design quilts and I have my own hand dyed. I just don't know that
Right.
I could do more. Yeah.
Okay. So you do a collection for Moda. What do you give them? I mean, you don't strike me as somebody who's sitting, as you said, you're not a graphic designer. So you don't strike me as somebody who's sitting there on Illustrator manipulating the repeat. Am I right? Like you create I'm imagining that you create like actual fabric and then you give
That
them
is
the fabric and they take care of it. Am I wrong on that?
exactly what I do. I send them pieces. They're a little smaller than, say, fat quarters of yeah. That's what I do. I make little sample pieces of fabric, and I think actually that's the best way to get. See, the thing is, I'm still doing it on this Pima cotton, but they're going to print it on whatever substrate. I don't know exactly what it's a cotton, but whatever substrate they use. So I think it's really important that they know exactly what it's supposed to look like, so that they can recreate it exactly that way. So yes, and actually that's one of the things I've always loved about working for Moda. Nobody's ever turned to me and said, "This would be so great if only you'd send us Illustrator files instead."
Mhm. They're willing to work with you with the way that you make things, which is potentially different from the way any other designer in their portfolio makes things. I mean, you have
Right.
your own process, and your process includes imperfection, right? Like when you're laying wax on fabric and then dyeing it, it's not going to be, a perfect circle, a perfect
No.
oval. Like, part of what people love about it is this organic feeling, like the wax was just a little bit whiter right there, so like it doesn't look computer generated.
Yeah, and actually yes, I think that is one of the beauties of it, is that when you buy from me, whether it's my hand dyed fabric or the stuff that I designed for Moda, you're getting something truly hand drawn. If you buy from me directly, if you buy my fabrics, you are getting something that I either stamped on there or drew on there. And that's a pretty rare thing these days, especially as an item that you're supposed to reuse and make your own, whether you put it into a quilt or clothing or whatever. I think and I don't know, when I was in college, I had, I was an idealistic, and I hope I'm still somewhat idealistic, but I was really, really idealistic. And being in the printmaking department here too, there's a lot of great artists that we can name, Jasper Johns or Robert Rauschenberg or any of these like big artists who've made prints, and people talk about how they're just amazing printmakers. But the truth of it is they actually don't know how to make any prints. They don't know the techniques of printmaking. They go to a master printer and they say, "Hey, I have this painting and I want to see it as a print." And they'll work, it's a cooperative process. They'll work with this master printer. But in terms of pulling the print, they don't know anything about pulling prints. They don't pull any prints. So when I was in college, I thought it was very clever. And I decided to start this whole campaign about how printmaking, it needed to show the hand of the printmaker. And, I made these like Xerox posters that I put up all over the art building and nobody knew who it was. And then I was invited, because I had some other pieces in the student show, to talk about my pieces. And I had put up one of the posters in the student show, kind of like in the middle of the night. And so as I'm giving my little talk about my pieces, I walk over, I direct the crowd over to my little poster, and I make this big announcement that it's been me all along. Posters about the hand of the artist and how I feel like it's so important. And really, actually, what I'm realizing now is I haven't changed a bit. Kind of disappointing. So I still believe in the hand of the artist. I love that. That's one of the things I love actually about making a quilt or seeing other people's quilts or their embroideries or fiber arts in general, is that you can't hide that hand. You see it,
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So I want to talk a little bit about your background. And you were born in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And spent time in Tel Aviv as a child. And when did your family move to the United States?
It was back and forth for a while, but we moved permanently when I was 9.
Okay, and what made them decide to move?
My dad, he was a doctor, and surprise, surprise, there are a lot of Jewish doctors in Israel, and Jewish doctors and Jewish lawyers. Um, so, um, he just had more career opportunities. And
Okay.
my mother was also, she was a research scientist. She worked for many years at MD Anderson Hospital in Houston, in the cancer research labs, and I think she felt like she too had more opportunities in the United States.
So are you still bilingual?
Yes, I speak to my parents, especially now that they're older and their cognitive skills have gone down a bit. Yeah, I speak to my parents exclusively in Hebrew.
And when was the last time you went back to Israel? And what did you think about it when you were there? Like, what struck you about it?
It's been a few years. I was there in 2009. My eldest daughter was swimming for the U.S. team at the Maccabia, which is kind of like a teens, or actually it's not just teens, but an athletic competition. And I always feel very connected to Israel, and I have family there, and so to tell you the truth, I always feel a little kind of conflicted about. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I love Austin, but I'm always very happy to come and somewhat sad to leave. But I know that I'm where I belong.
And I want to talk a little bit about sort of Judaica patterns. I've written about this on my blog. I'm also Jewish, and I feel like when I look around, and I want to make things for my family to use for the Jewish holidays, challah cover, something for the sukkah, etc. There's just so few modern Jewish fabrics and patterns and that are out there. It's something that I'd like to work on at some point in my career, maybe being able to bring some of those out into the marketplace. But I wondered if you've noticed that and have thought about that in any way.
I definitely have made Judaica for my own family, and I do it for customers as well. Just recently, I made a challah cover for a family where they specifically asked me to use their family name on the front of the challah cover using my hand-dyed fabrics. I've even I've been very active in kind of improvisational quilt making, and I've improved Hebrew letters again for challah covers, or I made a baby quilt once for a customer, and again it was all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but kind of improv pieced and using all hand-dyed fabrics. So yes, I would very much like to, and I even use. So this is like a bit of trivia that will only appeal to 2% of the population. But so I belong to a synagogue in my town, and I more than belong to a synagogue. I am the Torah and Haftorah trope teacher at my synagogue school, which means I teach sixth graders and seventh graders how to read from the Torah and how to read the other books of the kind of Jewish liturgy for their bar bat mitzvahs and otherwise. And so I use and I made and used my own talit that I have made using my shibori techniques and stuff. So I'm very into. I would. Updating what Judaica looks like these days,
Yes.
and be just making it more personal for people, making it part of today's aesthetic as opposed to the aesthetic that I love my grandparents, but I don't know that I want my talit or my challah cover or what I use for Passover to be like that anymore.
Exactly. Okay, cool. We got to get together on this because this is really important to me. So, this is something that I think needs to happen sometime fairly soon. But all right. So, for last question before we get to your recommendations, I hear you wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Is that true?
Oh, not quite that early.
Okay.
So one of the things that was really hard for me when I broke my ankle, and I broke my ankle doing something athletic. I had just gone to climb Pikes Peak, and I was on my way down Pikes Peak, almost done, and I would love to say I was doing something, incredibly exciting when I broke my ankle, but I was actually just walking down the trail, and, maybe I wasn't concentrating. I was thinking maybe more about how I was going to use the hot tub at the hotel that night or something like that, and slipped and fell on the gravel and broke my ankle. But so I'm very athletic. So, a lot of times, especially in Austin, where, even today, I think it's going to get to be, 90 plus degrees. You got to wake up early to go running if you want to run. And so, I'm a runner and I'm a swimmer. And so, yeah, you have to wake up early if you're gonna do those things.
Okay, so do you swim like daily, or I'm like,
I
what does your
used
morning routine for exercise look like?
Oh, it changes because I like to do yoga too. So, but when I'm running, I'll probably run 4 or 5 days a week, and then I'll swim a couple days. I like workout. I mean, pretty much every day, sometimes more than once. And I call it my homicide prevention technique, so that I don't kill anybody else. So, um, and I have different runs. I have groups. I'm in a running group, and then I used to be on a master's swim team. So it's just a team for folks who are 18 and up. And I used to swim with them. Then I mean, everything that I do kind of athletic wise or physical wise, I do with some other people. So I belong to a yoga studio, or I still belong to the same studio. And I'll go, to class and stuff. I was so happy this morning when I realized, especially since it's, the day before Yom Kippur and I got to get a bunch of stuff ready. I was like, how am I going to get to yoga today? Till I realized that you're on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast and I'm Central Time. And so if you would be calling me an hour
Right.
earlier than I expected, and so I'd have no problem making it to noon yoga.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I understand. I went on my run before I called you this morning. So yeah, it's important. And I think when you do a kind of work where you're focusing a lot and where you are quiet a lot and sometimes sedentary, it is really helpful in my mind to sort of get out and run around or, exert yourself. When you come back, you have this like inner sense of calm. And for me, at least, I'm able to then sit down for a long period and work on something.
Oh, I totally agree. When I was laid up because of my injury, and I did try to do, some stuff, and then once I was given permission to at least like swim a little bit, I went to do that. But I felt like I wasn't the same person. I didn't know what to do with all that extra, not just energy, but where I'd been putting all that energy, and then I felt like I couldn't focus.
Yeah, it is. It's very helpful for focus. I think for a long time, I'm not a naturally athletic person, and I think for a long time I thought that it was like a waste of time because I also, like, you have 3 daughters and I don't have a lot of time. And so I was like, I can't use my time to, work out for an hour. That's like half my time, my free time. But now I've been running for 3 years and I see now that was exactly the wrong way to think. So, it's like a lifesaver really. So, all right, let's talk about your recommendations. The first one that I wanted to talk about is the Unorthodox podcast, which I just recently discovered and started listening to and love as well. So do you want to tell us what is that podcast?
So the subtitle of it is it's News for Jews, but I think that anybody could listen to it and think that it's hysterical. So it's put out by the editors of Tablet Magazine, and there are 3 hosts. And so it talks about, I guess, news of the week that affects the Jewish community, but it's done in such a wonderfully kind of irreverent and it's just very appealing, very very open, and very everybody friendly, that I really think that, and this is despite the fact that oftentimes they say things and I'm like, if you're not Jewish, how are you supposed to know that reference? And even if you are Jewish, chances are you don't know that reference. Mm-hmm. But I just, and they are irreverent, the 3 of them, and they are all unorthodox. And what's funny is that a couple of weeks ago they had a rabbi on there who is Orthodox, and he's doing outreach to Jews who are not Orthodox, trying to explain Orthodoxy to them so that it would be more appealing to them. And he was campaigning for them to change the name of the podcast to Orthodox. But it's just fun. And but then they also have author interviews on there. They had a discussion, especially in light of the holidays, Yom Kippur being the Day of Atonement, a kind of a day that you engage in self-reflection and ask yourself, what kind of person am I, and how can I be better? And they talked about being sorry for things and what that really, really means. And I thought it was actually quite meaningful.
Yeah, they had Marjorie Engel was the guest on that episode, and I love her, and I love her on Twitter, and she used to write for Sassy, and she's just like a great person, and she has a blog about sorry, like how to write write a sorry letter, where she collects different people's apology letters and analyzes them, and which is fascinating, the art of writing an apology. So that wasn't a particularly good episode. So Unorthodox Podcast, that's a good one. All right, and you wanted to recommend a novel by Louisa Hall called Speak.
Yeah, so I'm actually reading this for my book club, and I in all honesty, I would never probably have picked it up on my own. Interestingly enough, Louisa Hall lives here in Austin. She's a lecturer or a professor at the University of Texas. But it's about kind of the overload of our information. So it's written as a series of kind of almost disjunctive voices, both set in the future and set way in the past, like in the 16, 1700s. But it's all about what we have become via all our devices and all our artificial intelligence and our need for that kind of stimulation and connection, because we still need lots of connection, but we're maybe getting it in some of the wrong ways, or not getting it in ways that really fulfill people. I mean, they say that people have hundreds of friends on Facebook and yet they feel just desperately lonely, and or that, you get emails, but you don't feel connected to other people. And so this book really kind of deals with all these issues, and it's somewhat dystopian, but sections of it are not. It's just a very interesting book in terms of thinking about how we connect to other people and what our kind of hunger for new technology is really doing to us.
Okay, that's a good one. I'll have to check it out. I've never heard of it before, but it sounds like a good one. I don't read a ton of fiction. Right now I'm reading the biography of Elon Musk, which is really interesting. Yeah, he is such an interesting person, and I kind of love outer space, and I love like internet business, and he and like electric cars. It's fascinating. So I really recommend it. It's by Ashley Vance, and Elon Musk, man, he is the man. He is so cool. So I'm like dying for a Tesla, which I actually never really care about cars, but now I really want a Tesla.
They're coming up with a more kind of, regular consumer model. So there you go.
That's what I'm waiting for. They're really cool. All right. And you had one final recommendation, which is the Headspace app.
Yeah, this is a great app. So, like a lot of people, so not too long ago I read, and I'm a huge fan of hers, of Gretchen Rubin and her whole series of books, The Happiness Project and Better Than Before. And she talked about how she really wanted to get into meditation, but she didn't feel like she could. And actually, in the course of Better Than Before, really kind of came to grips with the fact that perhaps meditation was not her thing. But I, too, have really wanted to. I feel like, for Pete's sakes, I go to yoga. Shouldn't I be into meditation? And I feel guilty sometimes because, you go to yoga, and I go to a yoga studio where, we do some pretty athletic poses, but it's not supposed to be about the pose. They tell us that all the time. It's not about the pose. It's about your breath and all this other stuff. But I'm sorry. For me, it's all about the pose. I come home and I text my daughter, and I'm like, I managed to get into this pose, And so, but I felt like I should be a little more in tune. And so in yoga, we, at the very end, you go into Shavasana, the corpse pose, and you're supposed to kind of meditate, just kind of listen to your breath and kind of delete or at least push away all those thoughts. The thing I like about Headspace is I think guided meditation is really, really helpful in that particular aspect. In yoga, we're just kind of left to our own devices to lay there and hopefully, push away thoughts or focus on our breath. But on this app, you put it on. They've got these great little graphics to explain to you kind of what the point of a particular kind of meditation is or what their focus is. And it's, it's a subscriptions, but you can try it out for 10 days for free, and not like free where you give them a credit card, free where you're just trying it out. So the graphics are really kind of cute and inspiring. And then the person who does the guided meditation has got a very kind of soothing, very British voice, it just feels it helps you to stay in that space. And I've been trying meditation for a while now. And one thing that they do that I've never heard anyone else do is there'll be a point in the guided meditation where they will tell you, now all those thoughts that you've been holding back, go ahead and let them come to center stage, you know? I've never had a guided meditation tell me that it's okay at this point to think all my thoughts and to let them just kind of run wild. And I find it more doable knowing that I don't have to, I'm not working it. There's going to be a point where I almost get to take a break, you know? And so, yeah, I just think it's a really good app, and you can put it on your phone, and you can do it anywhere with headphones. And so.
And it's short, like it's like.
Yeah, they're 10 minutes. The guided meditations are no more than 10 minutes.
Right, which I think is a nice bite-sized piece for people, but can still make a good difference in your day.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, Malka, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Walshy Naps podcast. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, I enjoyed talking to you. This was great.
Yeah, it was awesome. And where can people connect with you online if they want to kind of check out your work and see what you're up to?
So I do have a website, stitchanddye.com, stitchinddye.com. I can't tell you how many times I've spelled that. And then you can also find my work at stitchanddye.etsy.com. And then I'm on Instagram as stitchanddye. And on Twitter as Stitch and Dye.
Super. Okay. So people should reach out and find you in all of those places or whatever place they prefer. And you've been listening to the Walshy Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg, and I invite you to visit my blog, walshynaps.com, where you'll find helpful information for creative entrepreneurs, as well as tutorials and patterns for making stuffed animals and dolls. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend about it. And be sure to check out today's sponsor, Oaken Arts. If you live in the Seattle area, you can visit Oaken Arts in person and see the beautiful vintage Japanese yukata cottons. And if you're not local, check them out online at oakenarts.com. I think you'll love what you find. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.